Hello, my friend. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, are sample packs cheating? So let's jump right into this. So sample packs, it is not cheating to be using sample packs, but it can be seen as unoriginal. But really, as long as the samples inside are cleared for copyright and you got the sample pack legally, so you paid for it or is a free sample pack of some kind, then using sample packs is not cheating. However, there is kind of a range when it comes to what the producer community finds to be cheating or not. For example, short or percussive samples can be seen as more safe, while longer and more melodic samples being less safe. Of course, this only matters if you care at all what the overall producer community cares about, because if you're making music for people that actually listen to music, then they're not going to care about anything about that. We'll dive into this a little bit deeper, but before we continue, I did want to let you know that I've also written an article on this topic, so if you prefer to follow along or if you simply prefer the written word format, simply head over to Google, type in "are sample packs cheating?" and I will be the first result up at the top, and you could follow along with this video. So jumping back right into things, navigating whether or not to use sample packs can be a tricky decision and process, and for the most part, it does come down to personal choice. There are a lot of factors to consider, from the length of the sample you are using all the way to how many times other people have actually used that exact sample. So to help you out on making a decision whether or not to use sample packs in your own productions, I've gone ahead and did a bit more research into this, and I have my own opinions on this, and I've created this video for you to use right now. So are sample packs right for you to use in your own music? If the definitive and more legal answer to that question is sample packs are not cheating, then what is the not so legal answer to that question? Well, naturally, of course, it always comes down to it depends. So here is an exhaustive list of things to consider when deciding if sample packs are right for you to use. First, what is the length of the sample? Are you using a short percussive sample or a longer melodic sample? For shorter samples, don't sweat it, just use it. Of course, for longer ones, you may want to spend a bit more time thinking about it or consider cutting it up. Next, how much are you actually modifying the sample? So especially when it comes to melodic samples, are you cutting, chopping, editing the sample to sound more unique, or are you just dropping it in? My particular thoughts are, if you're modifying the sample a whole bunch, especially if it's almost hard to tell what the original sample was, then definitely go ahead and use it. There's nothing wrong with that. Third is, how many times has that sample been used? Particularly if you aren't modifying a longer melodic sample and it has been used in lots of other productions, that could be a reason to reconsider the sample for sure. Next, will you use the sample in the final version? So if you're just using the sample to kickstart a song and you plan to recreate it or heavily modify it later before actually finally releasing it, then go ahead and go nuts with it, I would say. And lastly, how did you get the sample? So if you purchased the sample from someone or a company, then you are technically in the clear for sure. However, if you illegally downloaded the sample or sampled someone else's work without their permission, you are less in the clear, but honestly, you could still probably get away with it. So these are some questions to ask yourself when it comes to using sample packs. If you want my honest opinion, I would say go nuts almost like 9 times out of 10 times. And in fact, I've also personally released a bunch of songs, self-released and on record labels, where I've used sample packs and loops. The only times that I would say don't use samples is if the sample used is long and melodic and you've barely altered it. Sometimes, particularly, these samples can also just sound like a sample, and that's just going to make your song not sound good. Next is if the sample is uncleared. So if you sampled like a Lady Gaga song or something and you plan on releasing on Spotify or Apple Music, you can run into trouble there. And third is if you got the sample from a free pack or even a paid pack that literally everyone is using and it's easy to tell, that can be a reason to not use it. Even with the longer melodic samples as well. Anytime someone might hear the same sounds in different songs, if they can really catch on to that, that could be a reason that they may steer away from that song, and it is another thing that can make your music just seem a little bit less original. Then moving beyond samples, the actual individual samples, is using pre-made loops in your music cheating. Let's dive into that next. So these days, sample packs can come with a whole bunch of items, including those one-shot samples, drum loops, and melodic loops. So is it bad to use loops in music? So when it comes to deciding whether or not to use pre-made drum loops or pre-made melodic loops, decide if it's cheating or not, the answer is quite similar to whether or not using sample packs in general is cheating. because using pre-made loops is not cheating. And again, it does depend on how you use the pre-made loops and if they're copyrighted or not, and how you actually got those pre-made loops. So if you legally or not so legally. So I did find this quote on Reddit from a user called Pagan Za that modifies a common idea when it comes to sampling, and I liked it quite a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and recite it for you. So I thought using loops was cheating, so I programmed my own samples. Then I thought using samples was cheating, so I recorded real drums. I then thought that programming was cheating, so I learned to play drums for real. I then thought using bought drums was cheating, so I learned to make my own. I then thought that using pre-made skins on those drums was cheating, so I killed a goat and skinned it myself. I then thought that was cheating too, so I grew my own goat from a baby goat. I also think that is cheating, but I'm not sure where to go from here. I haven't made any music lately, what with the goat farming and all. So in short, don't get lost in the rabbit hole of what is cheating or not. Just focus on creating great music and lots of it. Try not to get too caught up in whether or not you should be using other people's loops or samples is really the takeaway here. So the focus should always be to just make music and make as much as possible. And I think a good way to really dive into this further is to check into the question of, do other big producers use samples in their music? So when deciding if you should use sample packs in your own music productions, it may be helpful to know if other people are using sample packs as well. And the answer to that question may or may not surprise you, but most music producers do use sample packs in their music. It's pretty safe to say that most bedroom producers rely on sample packs, whether they're making hip hop, house music, or pop music, rock music, whatever. And in fact, based on research by Statista, it is reported that in March 2019, it was reported that music creation and collaboration platform Splice had 2.5 million users around the globe, which was up from 1.5 million users recorded just under a year earlier. So 2.5 million producers growing rapidly on one sample pack service alone is quite a lot of producers. But did you know that this number doesn't just include bedroom producers, and it actually includes larger sample packs, larger producers as well. So one of my personal favorite artists, Disclosure, have mentioned several times on their own production live streams that they use Splice sample packs in their own productions. It's also pretty common for larger artists that have sample packs available to actually use their own samples in their own productions to speed things up. However, not all bigger artists are keen on using sample packs. For example, Deadmau5 has mentioned that he is against using sample packs in the past and has like a pretty intense opinion on that for sure. And so you might be wondering, is it common to use sample packs in all genres of music? And using all kinds of samples, one shots, drum shots, melodic loops, etc. is very common in all sorts of music, from electronic music to house music, techno, EDM, hip-hop, lo-fi, all sorts of stuff. It's a little bit less common in music like rock music, country music, and pop music. But personally, when I was producing rock music back in the day, there's a pretty common practice of replacing, say, the kick, snare, and some of like maybe the tom elements of the drums, and replacing, or at least layering them with more highly produced one shots of those kicks and snares, and it just makes the overall sound quite a bit more polished. So that is a bit more common of how it'll be going down in the rock and country music stuff, a little bit less of how it's done in the electronic music stuff. And lastly, I wanted to touch on another topic. We've mostly been talking about audio loops and audio samples. What about actual MIDI loops? Is using MIDI loops cheating? So let's dive into that. The last step to coming to a definitive answer to whether or not using sample packs is cheating or not is to discuss the MIDI loops, which can commonly be found in sample packs. But first, you might be wondering, what is a MIDI loop? So a MIDI loop is a pre-programmed drum pattern, melodic line, or chord progression without the actual sound. You need to load up a sound, like a drum set, an instrument, or a sample, for the MIDI to then trigger that sound. And honestly, again, the same rule applies here. Using MIDI loops is not cheating, but can be seen as unoriginal. It really all depends on how you're using the MIDI loops and where you got them from. So again, with almost anything in this area, using loops is fine as long as you've got them in a good way and you're ideally changing them up in some way. So personally, I use them a whole ton in my music. Particularly, I was doing this a lot when I was starting. I was using particularly a lot of like kind of drum loops, like hi-hat loops, and even full top loops, which would be like hats, toms, and snares in the full loop. And what I found was it sped up production so I could worry about getting like the idea out of my head finished a lot quicker. And then after maybe a year or so of producing that way, I was doing something where I would produce a new song and release it every single week. After a while, like seeing those loops and working with those loops, it gave me a better understanding of how to program them in myself. And now I'm a lot better at doing these things myself. I'll still reach for loops every once in a while, maybe cut out parts a bit more and not just use full loops. But starting out, it's a fantastic way to really learn how to create these parts yourself and just to speed up the process a lot. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're making music for actual people that are listening to music and not just for other producers in the community, that kind of thing, then almost no one's going to notice, particularly as long as it's an original loop or it's been cut up quite a bit. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe for more stuff like this. And if you are finishing your songs and you want to learn how to release them, I've put together a 7-step Spotify release checklist. It's one I use myself, and I've gotten about 4 million streams on Spotify so far. I still use this checklist to make sure that my releases just happen a lot smoother, and then on release day I'm just chilling. Everything's accounted for in it, and it's not 55 steps, it's just what you need to do, the most important stuff. So there's a link to that in the description below. Check it out if you would like to. Other than that, good luck on producing, good luck on your next release, and I will see you in the next video, my friend. Have a good one.